My name's Arran. I live in Calverton, Nottingham. I'm employed by Nottingham City Council as part of the Community Protection Directorate. Prior to lockdown, I led a fairly normal life. I live in a rented property, run 2 cars, have two children, and I'm married. Prior to lockdown, I had many plans for the duration of when lockdown took place. Annual family holiday, trips to see other families and friends throughout the year. I think for me, I probably had a bit of a laid back and blasé approach to the pandemic. I think we live in a society where media certainly plays a big part in blowing things out of proportion, and we know that from the past. Unfortunately, we've seen how the media has resulted in some people taking their lives to the point where they've blown things out of proportion that much. I'm usually quite apprehensive when things appear in the media, and I think that's the kind of approach that I took with it. As far as work's concerned, work was running as normal, in the sense that it was a normal sort of busy day, and I guess really after it became clear of the pandemic, situation at work completely changed. Well, all of a sudden work became a bit of a ghost town. The government announces that it's officially become a global pandemic, enforcing a lockdown across the country, and pretty much most of my colleagues left the building, took their computers with them, and there was only the last few frontline staff that remained at work. So work changed in that sense. Subsequent months following that, as we worked our way through the pandemic, the workloads then started changing. So I work for Nottingham City Council in Community Protection. One of our regulatory functions is to respond to all noise nuisance, and with having so many people not in the office and working from home, there was probably a balance of people making a lot more noise, with being put on furlough and things like that, but then there was also a fair proportion of people that were reporting noise issues because normally they'd be at work and wouldn't notice next door neighbour's dog barking all the time, or next door but one who works shifts having the music on all day. So the workload changed, and then there was also the mutual humanitarian aid. That was something that was probably at the forefront of the work that the uniformed officers were doing within my department, and it was really inspiring to see how they'd effectively dropped all of their normal responsibilities around enforcing against environmental crime and antisocial behaviour and things like that, to coming to the rescue of so many citizens across the city. They had to learn quick. They were doing things that they wouldn't normally do, which could be anything from picking up a prescription to someone who was shielding, and going to do the shopping for someone who's elderly, who's not got any family or support mechanisms around, to sad cases where they go and check on someone and find someone living in really unsanitary conditions. And worst case, where they've unfortunately come across dead bodies. So in my current role as the manager for the dog control service, I also work as a staff officer for the whole of CP, which effectively is within the uniformed services, although I no longer patrol on the front line due to the pandemic and the guidelines put in place by the government. That did leave us in a position where a number of our frontline staff were having to shield. Doesn't change the fact that we still have a responsibility, and we've got a duty to fulfil. So I certainly put my uniform on many occasions throughout the lockdown to fill the gap, so to speak. which was interesting because not only did I realise how rusty I was, I did get to do something that was incredibly rewarding, which is not necessarily a top priority in a uniform role. As much as you want to help out, local citizens, and when you work in the neighbourhood, you've got your local sort of care homes and that, where you often visit and help out where you can. But it's really rewarding when you're turning up to a property to give someone their medication because they're simply too scared to leave the house. So for me, it was really rewarding having the ability to go out and do that. Whilst I work in the city centre, right in the heart of the city centre at Byron House, and for the first few weeks whilst all the shops were shut, I had to resort to the food that my wife was cooking for me for my lunch every day. But once it became clear and some of the guidelines set by the government were unpicked, and certain shops understand which ones could be open, I was able to go out into town and start sort of doing the odd bit of shopping here and there. It was interesting because if I would go shopping at my local supermarket, there was huge amounts of products that they just simply did not have in. And thinking back now, I've not thought about it since, but things like flour, so many people were taking flour off the shelves and things like that. But strangely, and I think this was the upside for me, is being in the city centre, the shops are fully stocked. So, it was a great thing. But in terms of the footfall, it had dramatically dropped. And I think people forget this quite often during the daytime. Unless you venture into the city at night, people often forget how many students we have in the city and how much they do contribute to the city in terms of the value they bring financially. And having that lockdown, I saw straight away, it literally turned the city centre into a ghost town. It was literally like walking through town on Christmas Day, and I've worked over the Christmas period before, and it was just like Christmas but without the poor weather. It was a very bizarre feeling to see your city like that. So I'll give you a bit of a background as to how the journey sort of went at my house. So as soon as they announced lockdown, the closure of schools, my wife went into absolute panic mode, which she's renowned for. She's the sort of person that if she found £20 on the floor and kept it, she wouldn't sleep for several nights because she's so honest. But she is a really panicky person. So she didn't deal with the pandemic very well at the initial stages. It took weeks and weeks of reassuring her that we'd get through this, and the kids aren't going to die, they're not going to catch it, everything's going to be okay, you don't need to worry about your grandparents, it'll all be fine. And it took weeks of doing that, and at the point when she started listening to me and getting over that point, we started getting to that point where we could start moving forward and getting past the anxiety of what we was facing with the pandemic. My wife works with service users, so those who are either substance users themselves or people affected by other people's substance misuse. And she was classed as a key worker. She does deal with children on a daily basis, and she needed to be there for these children, especially where you've got parents who are alcoholics. They're now on furlough, or they're working from home. They're likely to drink a lot more. There's a lot of stressed out parents. So now is a time more than any when workers like my wife were much needed during the pandemic. So with us both being classed as key workers, it was another point where we needed to make some difficult decisions around the kids. And initially my wife was working from home. We had both the kids out of the childcare, but as the sort of first month into the second month passed, we got my son back into school, and we did find that actually worked out a lot better for us. I think he was suffering with a lot of boredom, he wasn't getting the same attention that he would get at school, in terms of his friends and his teachers. My wife's trying to look after a little baby as well as trying to teach my son, and as a parent I think you always want the best for your children, and you know, I'm not going to lie, I guess we do probably drive our kids a little bit too much, and she probably was asking a little bit too much of him, whereas a qualified teacher is probably not going to do that. They, you know, they're skilled with the correct tools to, you know, to educate a child correctly. So we certainly found it a lot less stressful by him returning back to school. But it does still then put you in that position where you're thinking, well, he's back at school, he's around other kids, he's not surrounded in this, you know, this cotton wool house. So it did start the anxiety a little bit, certainly on my wife's part, but I think we got through it pretty well, and to this day he's back at school full time, and my daughter, she's back at the nursery. So I think we're sort of way past where we were, the position we was in a few months ago. I don't think the situations concern me that much. There was only one point when I got really concerned. That wasn't when I was out in a uniform coming into contact with people that, you know, are shielding or more vulnerable. It wasn't when I was walking through the city centre ahead of a time before you had to wear masks in shops. So that's not affected me. What did affect me is when it got to the point when we was meant to be going on holiday, and it hit me about 2 weeks before we was due to fly on a plane, and that was a point when I did start getting nervous, because I was kind of thinking, you know, you're on this plane, you're going to be on that plane for several hours, there's a lot of germs around a little aeroplane, and I guess those thoughts were starting to creep into my head. But again, you know, thanks to good old COVID, the holiday got cancelled 6 days before we was due to fly, and like many Brits, we had to settle for a local break in the UK. So I guess really that worked out well for me. I think the future, I don't, the future's bright, the future's orange. I had to say that. I think for the future we'll pull together as we always do, as a country, as a nation, as society, as cohesive communities. We'll all pull together. We've already seen that during the pandemic, how the country's pulled together. You know, people have really got behind the NHS. I do think that quite often we do things good in a good and a bad way. So, and I'll use the NHS as an example. I think it's great that we all got behind the NHS, but I think it went a little too far, and I think it lost the element of what the meaning and purpose was. I mean, I saw some really crazy things, and it's not to say that it's not deserved, but, you know, I heard of holiday companies offering NHS workers free holidays, various shops up and down the country offering free products and reduced prices on this, and the Royal Mail painting post boxes in blue to represent the NHS. And I think it's great, but I think, again, it's probably caused people to have that kind of opinion like I have now, which is, it's not that the NHS don't deserve that, it's just you can really milk something too much and it loses all the meaning. But certainly for the future, I think the operating model that a lot of businesses are going to work on is going to change. We're already seeing, you know, with guidelines, businesses having to comply with this and comply with that. I mean, that's going to change the way things are going to operate, certainly for the rest of this year, is my prediction. But there's also, with so many organisations that have probably learnt quite a lot from what's happened, I wonder how many people are going to actually return to offices. Certainly for me, if I was running, I don't know, for example, a call centre, a recruitment company or something like that, where people could genuinely work from home and save me huge overheads of renting buildings and such like, well, I'm going to take the obvious business choice of not going back to that building, cancelling my rent, and, you know, having a business operating from home. So that, if that does become, you know, even 1 in 5 businesses make that decision that they're going to pay staff to work from home instead of returning to an office, that's going to have major impacts on various parts of our economy. That's going to affect things like business rates, which then in turn is going to affect on how much money goes into local authorities. It's then going to leave a lot of business centres and buildings empty. There's going to be landlords that are not going to be receiving rent. It's going to have major impacts, and this is going to take years for us to recover from. So I think, in short, yeah, we'll get through it. I think we'll get through it as a country, and globally, all countries are going to get through it. We're going to have no choice. We're going to have to fight until this thing is beaten. But I think the actual impacts are going to go on for many years. Some of the figures that the government throws around in terms of unemployment rates, they're looking, they're making all these various promises and things such as, NHS care workers, local authority workers due pay rises. That's going to impact on the economy. It's all going to impact in different ways. So yeah, I think the future is probably not financially very promising for this country.